do you feel that here and in other countries and in America as well, if we had some sort of system where for a few months any immigrant has to learn the language, learn the culture, do this, do that, that would actually sort out a lot of our immigration problems?
All that it means to be a British subject is I'm a subject of the king or queen. I guess in the case of Gaza, if your question is integration, they don't want to integrate into a different country like Egypt or Jordan. They don't want to be Israeli, that's for sure. And then the question is, are they going to be willing to make their own country on part of what they claim the land is all theirs?
In Britain, in Europe, we do have groups of people who don't want to integrate. They have no intention of integrating. It's hard once they're in the country. It's difficult to know what to do with groups of people that don't want to integrate. Hello and welcome to my podcast. I'm Jasmine Birtles, and today I'm joined by the author Hayden Graham from Connecticut in America. Hello, Hayden.
Pleasure to meet you and pleasure to see you again. Thank you, everybody, for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on, Hayden, because I asked you on, as you know, because you and I met online and on a networking platform just a few weeks ago. And I was very interested in what you were saying about immigration, how to do immigration properly. And in a kind of a way, your novel, which is not yet published, it's about to be published, is about that. That seems to be one of the main themes, which I think is very important for us here and now.
I think that's right. As you mentioned, I've written a novel about the greatest rescue in human history, which for me was the 1991 Operation Solomon, where Israel rescued 15,000 Ethiopians from an African war zone. I touch on many different themes, but among them is immigration, where when these people came now from what is essentially a fairly rural society in the African mountains and were immediately thrust into a modern first world economy, what does that look like? How does that work? And then how do you integrate both culturally, economically, et cetera? And that's
So,
what I've really focused on.
so this group in Ethiopia, say 50,000. I mean, they're Jews, aren't they? Who are
Yeah,
they?
so I mean, they're Jews. They are, I would say, they practice an ancient form of Judaism. According to their own legends and the history such as they know, they claim to be from the court of King Solomon, where in the Old Testament, the queen of Sheba, ancient Ethiopia, goes to go visit King Solomon 25 centuries ago. And then, according to their legends, she became one of his like 1,000 wives. They had a son who she brought back to Africa to become the future king of Ethiopia. And then he sent back with her several hundred bodyguards to protect her, who then stayed in the African mountains for 25 centuries and formed this ancient diaspora community. Beta Israel is what they call themselves, who then practiced ancient Judaism untouched by time. So they weren't affected by the rabbinic tradition. They practiced almost literally from the Bible, ancient animal sacrifices and everything until May of 1991 when they were rescued.
Wow. So that is, yeah, as you say, they're Jews, but not as we know it, Jim.
Correct, correct. They had to what I want to say, like reintegrate into the more modern world in many different ways.
And your main character is from that. Is he from that tribe?
Yes, so he's from the African mountains. He grows up as a boy there. He's from a poor family. He's in love with the chief rabbi's daughter. He's not good enough because he's from a poor family. And then the early 80s, Israel started to try to sneak these people out in small batches via boat. So his family gets the opportunity to leave. She stays behind with her father because he's not going to abandon like the village. In which case, he then makes it to Israel by the skin of his teeth, barely makes it. And then 8 years go by. It's now 1991 and he becomes the first Ethiopian Israeli in the airborne, the top brigade of their army, and you know they have a draft, they have conscription, so he becomes like this pioneer in the army, and then his first mission is to go help co-lead the rescue of everyone else who is now endangered by the civil war in that part of the world.
So this is, the story. It sounds great, good fun novel. But the core element that it interests me, that you and I spoke about, was how various different cultures. I mean, we're talking Jews on the whole, but very different cultures in many ways integrate when they come into Israel. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I think it's a key point that I was trying to make with with great care in the book. That yes, you could say that many of the people who came to Israel were Jews, although that means a lot of different things. It means religious, it means cultural, it means very different types of customs and cultures. You had Jews coming from 100 countries, everywhere from Yemen to Iraq to India to the United States to Britain and Northern Europe, Poland, etc. You had all these people. Sorry, Argentina, South, you know, Spanish-speaking countries, and it was a lot of people coming from a lot of different parts of the world, speaking hundreds of languages, and it was, I would say, not a very easy task to try to integrate people. And by the way, in the first several decades of the country, I'm not sure your audience knows, Israel was founded in 1948, following World War II, along with many countries. I would say the first couple decades they were struggling. Right now, granted, they were fighting many wars for existence. So they were kind of preoccupied and they were trying to get off the ground as a new country and a new economy. But I'm ashamed to say there was racism, not small amounts of it in the government, in the society, etc. And it was primarily directed downwards towards um, what you would call it a Jews of color, Jews from North Africa, Morocco, places like that, Jews of the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, places like that. And I would say that in the last several decades, the country's made a very specific and intentional move towards integration. And today, there's many ways of saying it, but not only have they had um, people of many different, what you would call races, involved in many parts of the government, but uh, one example that I like to give is the president of Israel, who we have a part. Israel has a parliamentary system similar to Britain. So the prime minister is the head of the is in charge, but the president is the ceremonial figure, perhaps analogous to the king or queen of England. And the president, the ceremonial head, Bougie Herzog, he's of what you would call mixed ancestry, right? His I think his father is a European Jew and his mother is Egyptian Jew. So he himself, in his own person, embodies this sort of integration of the many different communities from which the country sources.
So how did they do it? As I mean, as we've said, it kind of helps if you've got some sort of connection, at least of some sort of
Yeah,
Judaism. Okay, different
yeah.
types of Judaism, basically. But how have they managed to integrate? Because this is something that my country, the UK, your country, USA, a whole load, certainly any European country that you can pick, has not managed, maybe did not try even to
Mm,
integrate immigrants.
yeah, it's a
What?
good question. I would say a few different things. First of all, I think what partially helped is that when everyone came to Israel, pretty much everyone's adopting certainly a new place, right? Um, uh, and a new language, especially for your audience. I don't know if you're aware, Hebrew was not a spoken language in the street for basically 2,000 years, even from the time of Jesus in the Bible, 2,000 years ago. At that time, Aramaic, related but not the same as Hebrew, was the street language. Hebrew has not been a spoken street language for thousands of years. And in the early 1900s, Israel revived the language from what was essentially just in the synagogue and the prayers and the holy books into a spoken language again. So now, if no one if no one's starting from that point, everyone has to adapt something, right? So it feels like everyone is at least partially culturally adapting to a new language. Therefore, everyone's on kind of even footing in terms of y'all have to assimilate some because no one speaks Hebrew when they got there. So I think that was part of it, and I think that the other part was that Israel took a very intentional approach towards immigration, uh, integrating immigrants, where they don't have this in the United States, at least, where when you when you make Aliyah, when you immigrate to Israel, when you literally, it's a spiritual ascent. It means to rise up. The first thing you do there, once you become a new immigrant, is you are then sent to an immigrant absorption center. It's run by the government, and you're there. It's my understanding everywhere from 6 to 12 months, can be more, maybe even as long as 2 years, depending as to how long it takes to get integrated. And there they intentionally integrate you into the culture. They teach you the language. If you don't have a trade, they help you teach you a trade. They integrate you into at least one of the communities from which you came that now lives here. So if you're Iraqi, they'll set you up with other Iraqi Jews that have already come to connect you. Um, and especially for your kids, they're going to really focus on getting them ready for the army, which almost everyone serves in. We can come back to that, but is a really high point of integration. So even if not you, your children certainly become Israelis. And I think that, and to me, that this very intentional approach, where you don't just say it's going to happen by itself. You're going to say, we're going to make it happen, where people are enabled to integrate into the society. I think it's something that other countries could learn from, with the intentionality of the process.
Because I'm just thinking, when people come over to Britain, there's nothing I would, as far as I'm aware, you can just come over, if you're able to find somewhere to live, or if you're offering some work, they'll find you somewhere to live. But there's no necessity to learn the language. There's no necessity unless you want to actually become a British citizen. Then you have to do an exam and things. Otherwise, there's no necessity for learning the language, for learning the culture. So, do you feel that here and in other countries and in America as well, if we had some sort of system where for a few months any immigrant has to learn the language, learn the culture, do this, do that, that would actually sort out a lot of our immigration problems?
Look, I'm not an immigration expert. I'm an author, but I can say I think the situations in the United States and Britain are somewhat different, in the sense that the United States is what someone called it, like a covenantal community, right? We're a country that is specifically formed around a written identity. We have a constitution. Britain doesn't have a constitution.
No,
You guys
no,
have
no.
a Magna Carta and those sorts of things, but you don't have a written constitution, which
Yeah,
means that we have a document that says, to become an American, you got to believe this, right? And by the way, when you become a citizen here, you have to like swear allegiance to the Constitution, right? And and you can't say I accept everything but that one.
yeah,
Except for the Fourth Amendment. No, no, no. You got to accept all of it, right? And so um, there's been a couple books I could recommend. Leo Leibowitz had a great one, a few others around what does this mean in terms of this covenantal identity, that you have to become an American by accepting the ideas behind the identity, right? So I think America could do a better job in terms of having the civic religion, in terms of what does it mean to become an American, such that uh, what does that mean, right? I think that uh, Britain has its own challenges, in the sense that it never adopted a formal constitution, which means that you never formally define what does it mean to be a
yeah,
British person, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
that means it's hard to then say, well, how do you know that this person is or is not being British? British meant a subject of the king or queen of England, and I think the weakness of that is twofold. One is there's not a written identity to which one can then subscribe to then declare I am British because of I've accepted these set list of ideas, and therefore I am now British or English. I'm not exactly sure how you guys separate yourselves, but English, British, however you want to say it. Um, and then the second problem I think you guys has, because you became an empire, it meant you then conquered a quarter of the world, much to your credit. Um, you know, uh, both as an American, as a Jew, we've both rebelled against the British twice. So there you go. um, but what that meant, though, was that you then got sovereignty over people that weren't British, right? You have an empire, right? You've in India and in Israel, I think Egypt part of it, what time, Gibraltar, right? These places, right? And so what
right.
that meant is that, hey, I can't say you got to become an Englishman, like drinking tea, bad weather, loving football. You have to, all that it means to be a British subject is I'm a subject of the king or queen. But what that meant is that you could then be British in many different ways. I think that wasn't Singapore for a while under Britain, and Hong Kong. Like those were some very different peoples that were all considered British. So what that meant is that when your empire dissolved or was dismantled, it meant that you preserved the I'm a British person, But you lost the, well, now what does it mean to still be British? And then when you then let people then come in because, hey, I'm a British subject. I'm coming from whatever country that used to be part of it, part of the British Empire. You then said, well, you're a subject of the Queen. Come on in. When in reality, I don't think that subject to the Queen or King is, in my opinion, enough of an identity to craft a country around, right? You
Yeah.
have to. I am a British subject can mean many different things, and because you don't have a set of core ideas that say you have to believe this to be part of this group, um, it became harder.
That's a very interesting point. And speaking of belief, as I said, with Israel, you do have some sort of connection with religion, although, as you said, a lot of the Jews are not religious, but there's
Yes.
still, I think, an acceptance of core values. So, I do wonder again if Britain were more genuinely Christian, as it's supposed to be, but it's not. If it were genuinely Christian, and if those who came in were required to accept the Christian values. They don't have to be Christian necessarily, but to accept the values, that as well would probably help the integration, do you feel?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think the case of Israel's founded by Russian secularists um, of a country of what you can really only call Middle Eastern religious traditionalists, surrounded by 100 million or more, even more traditionalist non-Jews, right? That even the most fundamental Jewish leaders in Israel today, I think, would pale in comparison to the Ayatollah or any many of these people, right? So, yeah, I mean, the degree of religious um, shared shared beliefs is actually, I think, part of the challenge of Israel because you got a lot of many where tradition based upon bickering, squabbling, um, what we would call Talmudic dialogue. It's actually part of our tradition. We aren't a highly agreeable community. We're called stiff-necked in the Bible for a reason. What that means is that it's very difficult for us to get to agree on anything, and I think that being a small country has actually helped. I think
Yeah.
in the case of England, look, England has a national religion, is a national church. Um,
Theoretically, yes.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? In fact, I think there's some advantage of that. First of all, by formally declaring this is our the Church of England, I think that it allows us to say this is part of that common heritage. To just acknowledge a reality, by the way, that this is the British community from which it comes. I think that it also, and again, I don't live there. I'm not from there. I don't know much about the English culture from the inside, but it seems like it actually helps, and particularly for two reasons. One is, it seems to me that the English religion is a particularly, I'll call it a particularly mild one. And what I mean by that is, in America at least, what we call Episcopalianism here, there it's called Anglicanism, is one of the more moderate religions. What some people call it Catholic light, diet Catholic. It's like, half the guilt.
Yeah.
But it's specifically been known, at least here for a very long time, as a very moderate religion, which helps. A, it reflects, I would say, the British temperament, right? But also B, it means that religion is almost engineered to have a place, but not a overbearing, domineering one in public life, right? I, as a Jewish person, I don't get offended when I see a Christmas scene or a manger scene. I like a lot of Christmas music. It might be because, at least in America, Jewish people have written about half of the popular Christmas songs, so there is that.
Which,
But I don't think that's a problem.
yeah.
The other thing I can really say though is that because when you have a defined religion in a country like Britain does, it actually makes more opportunities, I think, for other minority faiths like mine. Because, for example, in America, we have the separation of church and state, so-called, so that you can't have any public funds going to religious schools. What it means is that if you're going to send your kid to a Jewish school, you got to pay for it completely out of pocket, like I do, which is, I'll tell you, not easy. In Britain, because it has this kind of state religion. It means that you can have minority schools like Jewish schools that actually are pretty good. Now they have to be open to everybody. So it's my understanding, for example, in the north, like near Manchester,
Yeah.
of England, they have like Jewish schools sponsored with state money that have Jewish, but also like Muslim and not Christian students who go to them, and these are not Jewish students learning about Judaism along with students from whatever rabbis and teachers, and anyone can go, but it's very high quality. What that means is that in general the English community, it's small, but the English community is way more Jewishly educated than the American community because of this ability that we lack here in America, but they have in England.
Finally, though, Hayden, I'm going to ask the difficult question because, you know, in this country, and I'm sure in America, the last thing you want to do is talk about Gaza. So I'm going to talk about
Okay,
Gaza.
go ahead.
Yes. So, how do you feel? We get every type of news, you know, every type of information about Gaza from both sides, lying on both sides, truth on both sides, and it's very difficult to work out which is true and which
Right.
is not true, frankly. But you know, we've been talking about Israel integrating. What about the Palestinians? Is it that the Palestinians don't want to be integrated, or the Israelis don't want to integrate the Palestinians? They'll integrate others. What do you feel as a Jew?
Yeah, yeah. So
What is your
I think it's a good question. So I think the question is split. One is okay. The basic groups that we're dealing with here are you have the Jews, which to me are coming home back to our homeland, having been kicked out by many different groups in the early 1900s and especially following World War II. Um, and then you have, I'll call them the the local Arabs, right? Now they then started to adapt a Palestinian identity as Palestinians a little later, not in 1948. They weren't calling themselves Palestinians then. They were calling themselves many different things, Southern Syrians, Northern Egyptians, whatever. But then, partially in reaction to the development of Zionism, they started to coalesce this identity, right? Now, after the war came in 48, they were basically split in two groups. One is the group is the part is called the half that stayed in what became the state of Israel, and the other is those who left. Some say they were chased out, some say where they were threatened, some say that they chose to leave to enable the advancing Arab armies to destroy Israel in 48 and therefore come back. And there were calls from Arab leaders across the world, get out of our way, run away, and we'll go destroy these people, and you come back and take their stuff. So there's many different conflicting reports. But the reality is that the call it half of the Arabs or Palestinians who stayed, they became Israeli citizens. So today, right now, there's about 20% of the country, about 2 million people living in Israel that are Israeli Arab, who are most are Muslim. There are some Christians, but mostly Muslim, who get equal rights. They vote. They serve in the parliament. There are Arab judges on the Supreme Court. There are they're overrepresented in some positions like in some professions like, for example, doctor. If you can believe it, there's a the the Arabs outnumber the Jews in terms of being doctors in the land of Israel. This is crazy.
wow, weird?
But the Arabs, mostly Muslim, some Christian, live in more or less equality. I'm not going to say it's perfect. There's racism, and discrimination, yes, but in terms of what the state actually advances, it's equality. Then you have the other half who either fled the state into places like Gaza or the West Bank, or they were already there. And remember, in 1948, when the country was formed, those areas were not controlled by Israel. They were controlled by Jordan in the case of the West Bank, or Egypt in the case of Gaza. So these were not Israeli territories that many of these Arabs fled into or were pushed into, however you want to say it. After the war in 67, the Six-Day War, Israel took those places over in terms of control, and Jordan and Egypt didn't want them back. So now what do you do with them? And so now you got this other half of the Palestinians who are like, well, we don't want to be Israeli, we don't want to be Jordanian, and we don't want to be Egyptian. What are we? And we want to have our own country. So you want to talk about integration. They don't want to be integrated into those other countries. And the big question has been, do they want to make their own country? And can it be a viable country that's going to be a real country, not just a terrorist state that they're just going to use to attack, right? In 2005, Israel tried to settle this question in the case of Gaza by doing a unilateral withdrawal. No, no peace treaty. Like we're just going to pull out. We're going to evacuate our own people out by force. We're going to take out the Jewish synagogues. We're going to unearth the corpses out of the cemeteries and bring them into Israel proper because we want to say this. You guys take this land and do what they want with it, right? Then 2 years later, they elected Hamas, and Israel put up a blockade because we can't have a terrorist group on our border
Mm.
importing rockets to shoot at us, in spite of that they did thousands, tens of thousands of rockets. So I guess in the case of Gaza, if your question is integration, they don't want to integrate into a different country like Egypt or Jordan. They don't want to be Israeli, that's for sure. And then the question is, are they going to be willing to make their own country on part of what they claim the land is all theirs? And are they going to do it in such a way that they are going to be the kind of country that can be part of the UN, right? Peaceful, not no war, not declare war on our neighbors, diplomacy, etc. And I think
Mm.
still it's an open question what's going to be.
Yeah, it's scary. I'm just a final question. Listening to what you're saying is, we in Britain, in Europe, we do have groups of people who don't want to integrate. They have no intention of integrating. It's hard once they're in the country. It's difficult to know what to do with groups of people that don't want to integrate. What do you think? Because I mean, the obvious answer is stop them coming in the first place. Well, we haven't. We've let them in
Yeah,
and
yeah,
encouraged essentially kind of pogroms. It seems to me,
yeah.
certain areas where it is like another country. What do you do about that as a government? What would Israel do?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think, as I was saying, try to adopt a much more intentional approach towards immigration, I think might help. And to be much less apologetic about it. For example, as a minority in the United States or in Britain too, I think it's pretty important that my children, even who attended Jewish day school and Jewish summer camps, like I want them to know about Christianity. I want them to know about the majority culture that formed the country that they live in, and it's not us. We might have influenced it. That's fair, but it wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't the Jewish people who founded America and who founded Britain, two of the most miraculous countries in the world. And I think it's not by accident. It's via very intentional cultural decisions along the way. And so for me, I would bring back Western civics in a very, very big, sorry, Western civilization, like the, courses on
Yeah.
Western civilization, much more intentionally. And I
Mm.
think that it doesn't mean you have to, I don't know, convert to Anglicanism, but it does mean you have to say, I'm joining a country where the country is founded by Anglicans, literally, right?
Yeah.
And I have to know about that. I, I, my daughter this year is reading Midsummer Night's Dream from Shakespeare. I remember reading Shakespeare in high school. You can't understand Shakespeare without understanding Christianity. The Bible.
True.
When Iago in Othello says, "I am not that I am," he's quoting from the burning bush.
Hmm.
Okay, so like this idea of the neutering of religion from public life, I don't think is a good idea, and
Hmm.
we try to avoid the subject by just bearing it, and by bearing it, you lead to this breakdown in shared cultural understandings and touchstones, which in this case leads to a situation where everyone's just living in parallel societies. And for me, I don't think that's a very sustainable and positive and productive way to live.
No, I agree. Hayden, it's been fascinating speaking to you again. I'm so glad that you came on my podcast. Thank you very much for doing that. I knew when we talked the last time, I thought, this is somebody I need to get on the podcast. We have some, useful things to talk about because we have to cope. We have to find a solution to integration with immigration, I think. And thank you for giving me your ideas.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm Jasmine Birtles. This is my podcast. Remember to subscribe, follow, like, tell all your friends, and just send them the link. Tell them how wonderful it is because you know you want to. See you next week.